Well, it might have been a holiday weekend for you guys, but it certainly wasn't a holiday weekend for tech reviewers, especially when it comes to those that talk about graphics cards. The bright side is, I think there's only one card left to talk about in the future that hasn't been announced or come out yet, and that's gonna be the RTX 4050, which is just gonna be kind of a crapshoot anyway. But anyway, AMD has just embargo lifted today the 7800 XT and the 7700 XT. Now we're gonna have two different videos for each of those cards because I don't want the videos to be too long and I want those searching for each of those cards to find the data that they want. So if you wanna know about the 7700 XT, stay tuned for the next video going live not long after this one. Anyway, moving on, I don't think the 7800 XT is gonna be that exciting of a love story, but there's a twist.
We interrupt this video to bring you a special message from iFixit. No, we interrupt this interruption with this interruption about new stuff from iFixit. Wish you had a new graphics card, but inventory sucks? Fix the inventory problems with iFixit. Whoa, don't drop it. Can't fix that with iFixit. Just kidding, yes you can. Wish you could take iFixit with you anywhere, but your pockets aren't big enough? Introducing the new More
and the new Minnow.
Take them with you anywhere. So get iFixit for your loved one, or just get them for yourself.
Okay, so to understand the 7800 XT, you first have to understand the 6800 XT. And typically when we talk about naming schemes, you would have an 800, so an X800 would be like 6800, 7800. There's no X700 or X800 for 5000 series or the first gen Navi RDNA 1 because there was only 5700 XT and 5700 for those. Those were like the highest end cards that they made. But the thing you have to take away from this right off the bat, before you look at the numbers and to understand why the numbers look the way that they do, the 6800 XT was the exact same Navi 21 die that you found in the 6900 XT, only it was a more shaved down version of it. When you look at the 7800 XT, it's not the same die as the 7900 XT. The 7900 XT is Navi 31. This is Navi 32. So whereas before you had the 6900/6950 later on XT and the 6800 XT, and then you cut into a different die family entirely down the line with the 6700 XT and below, this time the 7800 XT actually is below that cutoff. So what you're getting now is what is kind of like crappy naming. In my opinion. So AMD was very adamant that this card is more or less designed to compete with the 6800 non-XT because of where that cutoff is. I argued it is extremely disingenuous to name it a /800/XT whatever, but have it designed to compete with a non-XT card. So there's a couple things you can probably take away from this. One, there probably won't be any non-XTs this time around. The non-XT existed in a time when there was GPU mania and everyone trying to get their hands on graphics cards and there were shortages everywhere. Well, those days are long gone. There are no shortages pretty much of anything right now, unless the AI stuff we talked about takes off. That's neither here nor there. So let's talk about the specs, because side by side, even though it's Navi 21, the 6800 XT has more of everything. So we've got 4608 CUDA cores versus 3840. You got 288 TMUs versus 240. You've got 128 ROPs versus 96. And they're both 16 gigabyte GDDR6 256-bit memory bus, pretty much the same memory. So even though it is a newer generation core of the Navi 3X 3132, there's less of it. So you have to really count on the efficiency uplift and the performance uplift to make up for the deficit. Okay, so before we get into the charts, a couple of things. One, the card I'm testing today is the 7800 XT Red Devil Limited Edition. It's a $579 MSRP card, $80 more than MSRP. I really wanted to test the $499 MSRP card. In fact, we have it somewhere, it's reboxed. Ours is kind of a dud. After spending quite a while troubleshooting it with AMD and AMD's lab and retesting our own stuff and getting data to them, we've come to the conclusion, both teams have come to the conclusion, my 7800 XT reference card is probably overheating and not running right. Now remember, they are chiplet design, which means there's slightly uneven surfaces. So instead of using thermal paste, they use like a graphite thermal pad kind of a thing that's designed to squish and fill all those gaps. It's also important to note all these reviewer cards, especially the AMD cards, like the reference cards, are first run engineering samples. They are the final test prior to production of actual retail samples to confirm that all the machines are operating as expected. It also is expected that sometimes some things slip through, and this isn't the first time this has happened regarding engineering sample cards. So with that said, my tests, you have to keep in mind as we go forward, this is a card that costs $80 more than MSRP. So that's unfortunate. The other thing too is with my charts, I have everything sorted by 1440p because that is where the card is designed to really slot in terms of resolution. 1080p is on there as well. But you're gonna notice like a 3080 FE on our charts, and that's because of the fact that you cannot deny and argue that used cards are definitely worth considering. And considering the fact that you can get a 3080 10 gig non-LHR lightly used card for about $450 to $500 these days means it is definitely a direct comparison price-wise of what you could spend today with the 6800 and 7800 XT. If you don't care about used or whatever, you don't care about the 3080, then just throw those numbers out. But that's something to point out is you guys have requested I start comparing to more like what's previous gen used stuff go for. That's something to consider on there as well. With that said, let's go ahead and jump right into the charts. Now we're gonna start with Port Royal. Port Royal is one of the synthetics that I run. Synthetics are really good at showing you small changes in architecture that show up on a chart. But that's because it uses like no CPU, like no memory, it is just GPU bound. So when we look at the 7800 XT Red Devil, it's newer generation RT cores. Remember, they're second gen RT for 7000 series and AMD versus first gen with the 6000 series cards. It's evident by a 1,000 point advantage. And then when you compare it to the 6800 non-XT, it's even farther behind at 1,500 points even farther back, or 1,400 points farther back than that. So, but when you look at the 3080, if RT is your thing, that's significantly farther ahead. But if we go ahead and move on to the next chart and we take a look at rasterization and we look at TimeSpy, TimeSpy Extreme puts the 7800 XT Red Devil way out the top. Actually, I don't want to say way out at the top, but it's definitely ahead of the 3080 FE, and so is the 6800 XT. But look how close together the 6800 XT and the 7800 XT is. TimeSpy Extreme is a pretty good example of showing us, again, small differences with RT aside that are tangible and you can visibly see them on a chart. Now, if we move on to actual games, let's move on to Shadow of the Tomb Raider, no RT. 1080p is an interesting one in this because you'll notice weird numbers with 1080p. That's because it's an older title. We test with older titles because we want to see what happens with the card's performance as you start to hit engine limitations or engine caps. Shadow of the Tomb Raider has like a hard cap at right around 220 FPS. And sometimes certain cards that are actually a lower tier will get a better 1080p average because it's not smacking that engine cap so hard that it's like throttling the card back down. And then what it does is it lowers your like 1% lows, which then brings down your average as a whole. So what you'll find right here is a 7800 XT Red Devil, although tying the RTX 4070, which again is a more expensive card. So that's a good thing for the 7800 XT is the fact that in 1440p it's matched an older title here, but it's got a lower 1080p number because it's probably smacking the limit harder than the 4070. At least that's just a good guess. But the 6800 XT is also scoring higher than it. So your guess is as good as mine. 1080p is such a weird resolution these days because cards have definitely gotten faster and faster to where the 1080p numbers get weirder and weirder as you go on. 5700 XT owners though, as we go forward with these charts, you're gonna see that's probably time to consider an upgrade of anything at this point. Moving on. Let's go ahead and enable RT though. RT in Shadow of the Tomb Raider is only a shadow RT. So even AMD is really good at being able to do shadow ray tracing and not actual lighting ray tracing. Technically it's lighting ray tracing, but it's a little bit different in the way that it's calculated. So the 4070 takes a pretty commanding lead there, but the 7800 XT Red Devil is showing some strengths over the 6800, but if you look, it's a couple of FPS. It's 2 FPS in 1080p and 3 FPS in 1440. Both of those are pretty much within margin of error. I think if we ran those tests 10 more times, we could see them trade leadership multiple times. But they're both ahead of the 3080, so that's actually a pretty good thing to talk about right there. You'll notice 5700 XT is at 0. That's because it cannot run ray tracing, obviously. It does not have any RT cores or any RT accelerators. Moving on now to Cyberpunk. Cyberpunk no RT, even though it's a little bit older title at this point now, going on 3 years old, I think, it's such a good linear test. It really shows differences between cards. But the 7800 XT Red Devil took the lead across the board on 1080p and 1440p, and pretty commanding lead in front of the 6800, and then the 3080 is definitely dropping back. 4070 surprisingly even farther back than the 3080. And that's kind of what we talked about with the 4070 review, was 3080, 4070 really kind of intertwines depending on the test, until you turn on ray tracing. Because as soon as you turn on ray tracing, boy, does that love story fall off hard. So as you can see, 4070 and 3080 just way out into the lead. But you'll notice 7800 XT and 6800 XT, the RT differences between the two are very apparent. That's just because of the newer Gen RT cores, and 3070 sliding in right between them. Like, yo, can I slide into those DMs? It like slid right in between those two. 6800 just way down there at the bottom. Borderlands 3. Now, Borderlands 3 is an AMD title. And what's unique about that is it's very good at comparing AMD cards to each other. It's almost like Borderlands 3 is just the AMD benchmark utility, if you will. So as you can see, the 7800 XT Red Devil is not significantly ahead, but only 6 FPS ahead in 1080p. And what are we looking at here? 7 FPS ahead in 1440, which is funny that they're closer together in 1080 than 1440. Which makes sense because we're starting to get near like engine caps as we get higher. This was actually the first test where I realized something was wrong with our 7800 XT reference, because it was losing to the 6800 XT by like 10 FPS. Now, it's not uncommon. Even if you go up on Tech PowerUp today and compare the two cards, you'll see that Tech PowerUp gives a 3% performance edge to the 6800 XT over the 7800 XT. And a lot of these tests will show that, but I think a lot of what they do though is also calculated based on specs rather than straight up head-to-head performance, only because the performance figures aren't public yet. So you can expect that to potentially change. If we go ahead now and move on to Gears of War 5, pretty linear test. 4070 at the top, 7800 XT followed right behind the 6800 XT by only 6 FPS in 1080 and 3 FPS in 1440. Obviously, if you're a 6800 XT owner, you're not gonna be running out to buy a 7800 XT, especially if you're playing Gears of War 5. So Guardians of the Galaxy Arteon, pretty linear test. 3080 FE way out in front, 4070 right behind it, and then the 7800 and the 6800 XT Red Devil, only a couple FPS behind each other. Right, the 7800 XT has a slight lead. Again, we're not talking about any particular commanding leads as a new generation card. But what happens when you turn RT off? You get this funkiness, where 1080p was all over the place, and all the cards like 6800 non-XT and up were very, very close in performance. So I can't explain what's happening with 1080p with this card, or these cards. If you see across the board, they're all acting weird. I don't know if this is an engine problem. It's looking a lot like an engine problem. We start to compare our higher end cards in this. They all seem to hit and smack a wall not far behind this. But we run everything with ultra settings because we're trying to really push the card as hard as we can. I can't explain why the 1080p numbers are what they are, but 1440p, as you can see, is a very progressive reduction in performance as you go down the card stack, which is exactly what I would expect to see. Which also shows why, if you're playing 1080p games, buying higher end hardware doesn't necessarily always lead to more performance. So you got to keep that in mind. Let's go ahead and talk about Forza Horizon 5. Interesting note with this one, our 5700 XT refused to launch. It would launch the loading video for Horizon and then crash the desktop every time. Clean install of the game, DDU reinstall of the drivers off of the website, even rolled back several drivers. It doesn't make a difference. It just will not launch for us. So that's just some wonkiness we're having a hard time figuring out. But the 7800 XT, as you can see, is in the lead in 1440p by 1 FPS over the 6800 XT, and it's actually 2 FPS behind the 6800 XT in 1080p. However, both those cards are beating NVIDIA for 4070 and 3080, or significantly behind. This is the last one. This is also another really good linear test. As you can see, everything is gapped between 1080 and 1440p as expected. 5700 XT, big fat zeros again. 3080 out in front with the 4070 right behind, then the 7800, then the 6800, and they tend to scale down as you would expect.
Corsair brings gaming to the next level with the Xeneon 45-inch flexible OLED Xeneon Flex display. With up to 240Hz refresh rate, 0.03 millisecond graded gray response time, motion blur canceling, anti-reflective coating, burn-in protection, and customizable bend based on user's preference, the Xeneon Flex from Corsair allows gamers to truly tailor their display to their liking. Click the link below for more details.
Now here's the thing we gotta take away from this. Although the 6800 XT is right behind the 7800 XT in all of our tests. Now, if we were to run 25 more titles, we might see these leads change. It is $150 less MSRP than what the 6800 XT launched at. 6800 XTs are not $650 and up anymore. This is where the buying decision starts to become a little bit dependent on what kind of a deal you can get on the card. You can bet 7800 XTs, being the newest generation, just launching, $579 card as tested here. If I had the Founders Edition, or the Reference Edition card on here, it would be even farther behind, because the only 6800 XT I have right now that I can test is a Red Devil. So these are Red Devils versus Red Devils, so they do tier up exactly the same. So it's not like I have a reference card versus a Red Devil, which would be unfair. It depends on the deal that you can get. Because I don't think you're gonna find any like blowout sales for 7800 XTs because they're brand new, but you will find great deals on 6800 XTs. So unless you can find a really good deal on a 7800 XT, which I don't think they're gonna be flying off shelves, 6800 XT deals are abundant right now. Like Micro Center has great deals, Amazon has great deals, Newegg has deals, because they're older gen that they were trying to blow out for the new stuff. But the retailers had no way of knowing the new stuff was gonna be kind of just performance parity with the old stuff. So now if they know you need the 6800 XT for performance reasons in terms of like compute power or rendering or any sort of professional workflow, they might start marking those up a little bit, because you're gonna get the same gaming performance essentially, but you're gonna get better productivity performance. So maybe don't wait if you need both of those. In fact, that 6800 price point at launch was $579 USD. So it's kind of like talking out of both sides of your mouth if you're saying, well, performance-wise, you should really compare it to the 6800 non-XT. But price-wise, it's $150 less than the 6800 XT. Less for a little bit more is not a bad thing. It's just, I don't think consumers are gonna, I don't think they're gonna feel well about the naming scheme. I have a theory behind this. I think the non-XT days are gone. I think they're all XTs, and I think the 6900 XTX has showed us the X moniker at the end, or the second X, or third X. That's gonna be the performance model. Hopefully we don't see that this year. We don't need that. All right, guys, sound off down below how you feel about the 7800 XT. I'm a little disappointed in the fact that it just feels like more of last gen with a new name on it, even though it's a newer architecture. But in terms of performance, at the end of the day, effectively, it's the same as last gen because they shaved it down enough to just sort of match it and beat it a little bit. Maybe that's how they're able to make it cheaper, by having it just be less of stuff. I mean, theoretically, that's how it works, right? Less stuff costs less, unless it costs more to make that stuff. I'm not in manufacturing, so I can't speculate on that. But I can tell you that at the end of the day, I feel just a little bit lackluster about it. All right, guys, thanks for watching. As always, we'll see you in the next one.